to a talk today. Thank you so much for being here. It means a lot. And let's get stuck in, shall we? So today we'll be talking about causality in a post-cookie world. And hopefully by the end, you'll know what that means. Just to start off, who am I? Hi, I'm Callum. I've been wonderfully introduced by David already, so I'll sort of breeze through here. I'm a senior data scientist at Digitas. I previously worked for Lloyds Banking Group, Ricardo, and I used to dabble with some academics in Royal Holloway. I'm part of the AI lab, which is at Digitas. So massive shout out to the team, all wonderful people, and they all helped contribute towards this. So, and also, if you've not seen Louis' talks before on NLP and motion analytics or graphs and transformers, keep an eye out for that. He's done some previous talks at Data Science Festival. So, what is the state of the art? It's currently always flung around this term, but what do we mean by it in this context? Today, we're going to talk a little bit about what the current state is of digital attribution. We're going to focus on platform metrics, lift experiments, and mixed media modeling. Hopefully, by the end, you'll have an idea how they all mesh together. So, when talking about platform-based attribution, especially in a marketing setting, what makes a good attribution metric? So this is certainly not exhaustive, but some things I'd like to pick out here are the quality of the metric. It should be complete, it should be representative, it should be trustworthy. So yeah, it should accurately reflect the co-op interest, and preferably half it shouldn't be missing. The continuity also matters. You want consistency, so people often make planning and decisions out of this. It's such a strategic aspect to these metrics. So it's nice to have them likely to be existing going into the foreseeable future. Having talked a bit about what makes a good metric, let's give some examples and talk through the journey. So for those not so familiar with this paradigm, generally speaking, when your advertising platform says that it reports its metrics, it does so through a function. And the function is by chucking a cookie, latching it onto you, and following you around until you perform an action. So you place a cookie on the user's browser. It's like a little tack. You show them an advertisement, perhaps as they're scrolling through a feed or something, or a pop-up window, or whatever the cornucopia of advertising formats are. And then, because you've latched onto them, you sort of follow them around the internet until they buy something. And then you see how exposing them to advertising leads to them, sort of buying your products. So commonly reported metrics, things like views, clicks, the reach, cost per click, and it sort of sprawls up into the horizon. There's a lot of metrics, but the general mechanism by which they are collected is the same. So what's the issue with attribution quality? Why am I here talking about post-cookie world? Well, a bit of a hint. So given an example customer journey, let's say a customer sees an advertisement on Snapchat, for example, no affiliation. They then see another ad on Meta and they click through. And then later on, they change device, search for a product on Google, and then go buy it. In what we call a last touch attribution model, which is perhaps most common, what we find, you generally speaking, all the value would go to the user search on Google, and that search-based ad, and then that would get the, this is a good advertisement, this led to that conversion, or this led, this view was associated with this purchase, or something like that, of course, a conversion. So actually, well, there's other things might have an influence. And there's other models, right? You have first touch. So let's say what we had visibility for 3 of these touch points. In the first touch, the user seeing the Snapchat advertisement will get all of it. Or it could be linear, we give the same amount across all. Problem is, these are just guesses, right? We don't actually know which ones had the biggest impact. How could we? And on top of this, there's other reasons why they might be a bit iffy. So what if the person would have brought it anyway? So regardless of having ads you threw at them, this was actually just essential to them. They needed it. Maybe their company mandated they had to buy it anyway. It doesn't matter how much advertising you throw, they're going to buy it anyway. There's no incremental gain from sending them advertisements. What about if it's influenced by from external factors? Let's say a family or a friend had brought the product and recommended it to them. And regardless of advertisement you sent them to them, actually we don't really value your advertisement, we value the opinion of the friends and the family. Or, maybe they're influenced by early and immediate interventions, as shown in this example customer journey. So there are some sort of inherent uncertainty of what caused a customer to convert, to buy, to engage in your product or brand. And this sort of coincides with, so what I'm setting out in those earlier slides is that some uncertainty attribution metrics at the best of times. We are not in the best of times. So the continuity of attribution in the EU and beyond, well, we have GDPR, increasing internet privacy legislation coming in, the major internet browsers, so Firefox, and in the future, Chrome. They seem to keep hopping that one back. But I think next year is the current timeline. Could be wrong, we might change it again. But yeah, the different internet browsers are phasing out cookies. And the public awareness of and the advocacy for online privacy is only increasing. This is a trend increasing towards privacy over time. So we'll have a progressive loss of signal for conversion metrics, because those cookies we want to hang on people and tag them around the internet, people are not so cool with that anymore. They don't like it. And this is so widespread because, GDPR, for example, doesn't exist to protect data belonging to EU citizens and residents, and it has a sort of extraterritorial effect. So if you're a US-based company, you monitor the online data of EU customers, you're still subject to these laws. So it is very wide sweeping. It's a very large amount of the population who it applies to. So given this context, there is huge financial consequences to it. One recent example would be Meta losing 700 billion in market value recently. This is due to uncertain and volatile macroeconomic landscapes, but at least 10 billion of that is directly, according to them, attributable to Apple's privacy changes. This is one company, one ecosystem, and all they've done is say that people can choose to ask ads not to track them. That means if you navigate on your social media site or online in general through an app, you say, don't track me, it doesn't track you. No more cookies, no more following around, no more reliability of attribution metrics. And this forms, this existential crisis actually for platforms such as Facebook and others who rely upon advertising for their income. So to sum it up, there are inherent flaws in the best of times, reliant upon cookies, so the future is uncertain to say the least, and they may not be aligned with business goals. And it's probably worth actually throwing this back to the point that people make business decisions based on these reported metrics, and they're making business decisions based on metrics which may not reflect the truth, right? They may be acting upon things which represent only a small amount of your cohort. Maybe you'd actually like to know what the Apple users think or behave or interact with your ads. So what are the solutions? The general sort of narrative at the moment is looking at aggregated data. So because we can't put cookies on and follow individuals, let's look at regions instead. Let's look at, and we'll go into this level in a second, basically grouping up geological regions or sort of time periods and looking how they move over time. And this is perhaps unsurprisingly had a lot of investment from the major platforms which rely upon revenue from advertising. So Facebook, Google, I guess actually Meta now, apologies. And there's this sort of branching into the open source world where we have Robin for MMM, GeoLift, Causal Impact, all fantastic packages. And the entire point of it is that they provide a way for which you can say it was worth spending that money in advertising. That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to say you spent X and you got this much more than you would have if you hadn't spent it. That is the question we're trying to answer. And because of the nature of that question, it is a causal question. I cause this extra revenue by my action, my intervention, spending money on marketing. And so let's get into geotesting as a paradigm. And let's introduce that as a way of looking at introducing causality into measurement. So we've talked before about segmenting markets into geographic locations. Please don't replicate whatever this graph is. It is very rough. Yeah, it's not real data. And if you look at the different colors here, you've got the light pink, you've got two regions. One will be test, one will be control. The dark red, two regions, one test, one control, so forth, right? So this would be examples like a multi-cell test. The idea is that you assign these regions as tests and controls in a matched way. You increase or decrease your spending in the test region. If you increase the spending in the test region, called a lift experiment, you're upping your revenue, it works. And if you drop your spending in the test region, you call that inverse lift. You expect a drop in revenue, because if your spend is causing revenue, oh, 1 minute, my stuff's turning off, and now it's not. Fantastic. Where was I? Revenue. Yes, and if you do inverse lift, you drop your spend in a region, therefore you expect a dip, right? Because you expect your marketing to be causing revenue. Take away a cause, so change. So what's good about this? Well, one, you don't have to worry about clicks or conversions and stuff, because do you actually care about that as a business? Well, I think you more like to care about revenue, perhaps, or number of new customers, market sort of saturation, or that sort of like, what can you measure directly, what matters to your business and your decisions? And don't you want to see how that, how your marketing spend is having direct impact on the things you care about, rather than the number of people who saw it? It's reliable during times of uncertainty because it's a causal estimate. It's not sort of some correlation which is taking a past and making a prediction to the future. We're testing here and now. And it has low data requirements. You need a few months really to get your teeth into this technique. The only real reason for the additional months is that you can learn which areas you should match as testing controls. So let's give some examples. So Misguided found out they were underestimating the IROS. So they had an existing model of an attribution model based on platform reporting metrics, I believe. Don't work for Misguided, can't tell you details. And they were actually getting twice the value from their advertising than the platforms were reporting. So they were massively underestimating the value of their marketing. Maybe that would really change how they made some business decisions about where they invested and what was driving their revenue. On the flip side, Yale found that they were overestimating their IROS and getting half the value that the platforms were reporting. Same case again, but opposite way around. And this really, for me, illustrates that you can't actually assume that you're going to be under or overestimating. It could be either, and it could be by a lot. And that's really the value of doing this, is getting a concrete measure in. Take-home points is that geotesting is a point-in-time causal estimate of the incremental gain introduced by media spend. Comes with some assumptions. Like all experimental design, you've got some assumptions you're making. It assumes that test and control regions are equally exposed to the same compounding factors. And the key reason to bother with all this is that you want to minimize the cost of your test due to matching them cleverly. So this uses something called a synthetic control methodology, which we'll go through in the next slide. But the key thing to take away here is it's cheaper than running an A/B matching paradigm where you're not being clever, you're not doing synthetic controls, you're not looking at the time period before, you're really doing a very fine-grained analysis to do minimum intervention. It's expensive to spend extra money, or you might have opportunity costs of dropping your spend. You want to minimize that, and that it should be very salient to you. So how does it work under the hood? So I've talked about the synthetic control methodology. I used the term matching earlier. That's only half true. It's clever matching. See, matching in experimental paradigms, normally people flinch. But in this case, you're using what's called a synthetic control methodology. And this is basically taking bits of different geographical regions, adding them together. And if you follow these lines on the graph, there's actually a red line and a black line. And this dotted line is the intervention. Pre-intervention, we've managed to make a synthetic control which acts exactly like the test region. So in the past, that's why that previous behavior is needed to do this matching. We've managed to conglomerate together a few areas, do like a weighted sum of them so that they act exactly like the test region. The theory being that after this intervention point, what's been perfectly matched up until this point, right? We've done one thing, one change, one intervention. We've injected money in marketing spend, or we've dropped money out. In this case, I suspect we've injected money in. And what that's caused is a lift in units. Let's say it's revenue here, called a lift in units compared to the control group here, the synthetic control. So the difference between those two is your incremental gain. So the difference between the match control and a test region is said to be incremental. So that is how we get towards a true and accurate measure of the incrementality. Not missing out half of iOS, half of your customers due to iOS, and not missing out Firefox, and missing out, all these different cohorts. In general, this is a more direct way of getting to it. This does cause a slight problem in that one key thing needs to be taken account of or considered, and that's spillover effects. If you have people in your control groups who wiggle their way into the test group and don't spend, that will underestimate. If you have people from the test group who wiggle their way into the control group and moving geographically, right? Because these are just geographical regions, they can move. We're not caging them into that area. If substantial proportions are doing that, you invalidate the test. So you have to consider things like spillover effects and also a similarity of your areas. Let's say we construct a perfect match in the past, and we've got two different countries we've matched together, but one has a different holiday than the other, was in the test period and has not been observed in the previous data. Well, that's going to cause a difference that's not due to your intervention. That will mess up the test also. So patching together similar areas, considering spillover, that's the nitty-gritty of doing this well. That sounds complicated, Callum. What am I going to bother with all that for? So why do these causal experiments, right? I would like to draw a parallel between a case study, in this case Zillow, and their predictive engine, which was looking for return on investment. So it looked at property and it said, do I buy that so I can sell it for more later? So it's trying to predict whether an investment will pay off more later. And this is sort of what often actually in marketing we want to do. Do I invest in marketing to see if it pays off more in revenue later? So initially this algorithm was fantastic, performed great, they made them a lot of money. And so they doubled down and invested it into more. However, the algorithm that they developed was correlation based. And when the past became a poor predictor of the future due to the market shifting, it led to Zillow making massive losses. So they lost over 500 million. I believe they had to lay off around 25% of their staff. It was bad, not good. Don't want to be that. Right? You want to avoid that situation. And it would have been avoided by having a solution that was fact-checked, that was sort of based in causality. And if the housing market has quite a long turnaround, but in marketing, we can measure on a much increased tick than that. We can have like more regular tests, basically, and we can measure over shorter durations. So we can actually continuously calibrate the system against realized gains. So we don't have that Zillow. So we can protect against concept and data drift. So we don't have to lay off our staff, so we don't have to lose millions. The often sort of drawback is, all right, Callum, we did the thing, we did the measurement, we know what we've got back in this channel now, but I have not measured this thing and I want to experiment with it. How do I do that? So where do I put my next channel across different channels, perhaps we've not measured yet? What about if the actual situation changed? We measured it in one situation, but we don't actually know really what happened if that situation changed in the future, right, dramatically. Because we've done a causal study, but we can't actually extrapolate to very different circumstances, right? It is valid in the context in which it was conducted. So what do we do then? So a common solution is mixed media modeling, and this is a time-based regression technique. For the interest of time, I'm going to not go too deep into the nitty-gritty of it, But a broad overview is like considers external factors and seasonality, but it tries to decompose those factors. If you're familiar with like a regression sort of design, you get coefficients, right? And you chuck in numbers to the algorithm, and because of the coefficients, you will find out, you know, what your return is. This is oversimplification, but the core idea is the same. So that says that you can sort of decompose to say, okay, let's look at, for example, how can I guide budget allocation across multiple channels? You know, can I evaluate how to advertise and influence the performance of the brands? If I've got things that are really difficult to measure, maybe that's a way of doing that. Because in mixed media modeling, you look at the past to predict the future. And you learn from the past and you extrapolate into the future. It's time-based correlation, right? So it has quite demanding data requirements. So 3 years or so of data at a weekly and monthly tick is usually the ask. But it's got benefits, right? You can do a marketing spend simulator where you change the inputs and see what the model spits back at you. So I would say, and this is sort of the first conclusion of the talk, is that current best practice is to use geotests to provide like a causal snapshot of a relationship between your media spend and your return. So your incremental return on advertising spend, IROS. And then if you want to be modeling different situations and to sort of explore and extrapolate into situations you've not seen before, MMM is a good way to do this still, provided you have the data to do so. And to keep yourself safe, you should be using regular sort of geotests to assess attribution. You should be using the MMM to model scenarios, provided that you have calibrated your mixed media solution to your tests. So if you have a set of inputs, which you know the answer for, you can make sure your MMM gives you the same answer as what the truth is. So it's a calibration. It's reining it in to known regions of safety. I often use a bit of the thought I put into it is like the tests are like pillars you drive in, they're your foundations. And then the MMM is like building out of those foundations. The further out you go, if you imagine expanding a bridge out from it, a bit more wobbly you get, right? So they could just fall out from underneath you. So you don't want to go too far away from where you know is safe. And yeah, so that's the importance of that. So a good example here is across 10 different studies, it's found that calibrating the existing mixed media modeling solution with experimental findings, for example, from a geotest, on average impacted the predicted ROI by approximately 25%. These are big numbers still. We're still a quarter off here, right? And if you've got millions of budget, that is a fair chunk of change. What is being misattributed here or misguessed. So if you're planning to have that revenue, suddenly you don't have it, then that could be a problem. So and this again goes both ways. Same as the previous case, massive overshoot, massive undershoot. You can't know if you're over or underestimating until you go test. So great, that's the end of my talk, but not quite. Because the problem's not yet fully solved. Some of the current limitations, which I'd like to introduce, are that actually, when we talk about mixed media modeling, the best practice generally suggests that you should collect, how many eyeballs have seen or been exposed to the data. When we say like eyeballs have seen or exposure to data, we're talking about platform reported metrics. Remember the cookies will hook on and track them around, which won't exist anymore. So these metrics may not be accurate at all, especially going into the future as we have this increasing degradation. So it might not capture iOS users, it might not capture anyone not accepting cookies on your site. And so therefore, can we trust the integrity of cookie-based attribution? And will that solution work in the future? Can we have confidence that when we do our simulations, when we extrapolate out, that things we're giving the model to learn from are valid and are meaningful? Because it might just not be, especially moving into the future. So one of the current problems, I think, in the field is that there's this perfect storm for this mixed media modeling-based attribution, in that we have some data drift. That means that the depreciation of cookies causes the input to these models to not mean the same thing as they did last year. Models don't really know that, right? Think about Zillow. Market changed, algorithm made its predictions regardless, massive loss. We don't really want that to happen. And those metrics might not exist at all in the future, so you have to rebuild your model and for faff what's involved with that. And you've also got on top of this a changing and volatile market right now. COVID, you've got Ukraine war, you've got these one-off climate events that are likely to get more frequent in the future. Customers changing their purchasing habits due to these unprecedented world events and changing macroeconomic factors might, sort of move you again towards this people are not responding as they did in the past. The past does not well reflect the future, it doesn't predict it well because of these changing circumstances. So any time-based sort of correlation, projection to the future can get more dangerous, and you can get towards these more scary outcomes. So having said all that, it's important to be careful is a key message to take over here. Not to run around screaming, flailing and saying, I give up, marketing is dead, but rather to say that caution is required at a minimum. So some things that really interest me are, as we move towards this best practice, we have this experimental design entering our lives. We're going to do these tests and we're going to do them on a regular frequency. Why not get the best out of it? Why not use some observational data on top? Why not go towards a more causal learning design? And you might say, well, Callum, because actually, why don't you just incorporate into video tests directly? Yeah, if you can, fantastic, that is best practice. But what about if it's just too expensive? Let's say you have, in an extreme case, let's say you're working at postcode granularity. I recommend it, but if you're working at postcode granularity, what if you wanted to measure something you have to get someone to knock on the door for, in each postcode for a country? It's going to be crazy expensive. You're not going to do that every few months or so, right? It's going to be too expensive to collect data, in your market, in your national context. So you're probably going to have to afford to collect that in your test and control regions, which are matched on other factors, but not upon the factor that you're measuring, right? Because you couldn't do that. You couldn't afford to measure it everywhere. So what do you do then? Well, what if you do a test and later on you learn something new, you overlook something important, you've got a new hypothesis, but I've spent my budget, I've got no more budget for tests, what do I do? These are situations where causal can help bridge this gap in this new context we've got. So I think a really interesting direction for future research is taking this paradigm of continually testing, leveraging it to get maximum value, and using these sort of Bayesian structural time series models, where we have an intervention time series, our test region, control time series, our control regions, and we measure the additional factors in these and then run your causal learning paradigm within those regions, right, to see how those factors are influencing your key KPIs, right? So within your business context, you'd want to embed this. So depending on what your strategic goals are, what information would help you make those goals in a more robust and reliable way. So if you really push into the future, what would like an ideal system look like? But what about if we then take it one step further and we actually think about, I've got some domain experts, I've got some strategists, I've got some media experts here, and they express that domain knowledge and we construct what is known as a causal model of that. So you have your DAG, right, which you directed a cyclic graph, which you construct from that, where you have nodes and edges. The nodes are the factors, the edges are the association, and arrow which points is the direction of the causal effect. So you can sort of really start expressing that. And if you can get a good representation of that knowledge, then actually maybe we can actually have a more causal, from extrapolation into the future. based upon our knowledge directly, not trying to take the past and fit forward, based on like causal mechanisms, what is generating this change. So that is what I think is the most sort of interesting and complex problems in this space right now, and something that I will be actively working on, I think. So yeah, causal MMM, a bit of a oxymoron, but yeah, is it the future? I'll let you discuss. So thank you so much for hanging around, listening to the talk and engaging. I've seen a few little chat and Q&As pop up, so I'm looking forward to getting engaged with those. Again, a big shout out to the DigTest team who helped support this work. And yeah, and the Data Science Festival for having me. Thank you very much.